Hey guys, this week we're going to talk about Scottie Pippen, covert contracts, and how to be a good teammate. Been watching the Chicago Bulls Last Dance documentary, and man, it's really rekindling my love for Jordan. But the documentary also doesn't exactly portray Scottie Pippen in the best light. There's some things that he's done that make you wonder, man, is Scottie even a good guy? I mean, he got his foot surgery during the season as opposed to the off season because he, quote, wanted to have a nice summer. He was yelling something. We don't know exactly what he was yelling to Jerry Krause, the general manager, from the back of the bus to the front where Jerry Krause was sitting, but I'm guessing it wasn't very nice. The players were interviewed, said, yeah, you could really cut the tension with a butter knife. And then, as reported in episode 7, which aired this past Sunday, he didn't want to go in for the last play of Game 3 of I think the Eastern Conference Finals against the Magic, because he wasn't going to get the game-winning shot. Tony Kukoc was. So he was protesting by sitting out. And you think, man, what's going on? Is Scottie a bad guy? But when everybody talks about him in the documentary, everybody says that he's such a nice guy. But I think that may be exactly the problem. I think what Scottie may have been suffering from was his own resentment, which stems from his inability to communicate. So Scottie made this contract in the beginning of his career with the Bulls. He went for longevity as opposed to a lot of money up front. I don't really know a lot about how contracts work. It seems like he went for longevity. He just wanted security as opposed to a lot of money. And as he was playing, he was a great player. He's one of the best players in the NBA at that time. I think he must have kind of thought, and again, this is speculation, he must have kind of thought, well, I'm just going to play really well, and the Bulls will give me more money. That's what they should do. That was a covert contract. But that didn't happen because either he didn't renegotiate or he didn't claim himself to be a free agent, which maybe you couldn't do at that time. I don't really know the exact details of it, but there was some contract of he had in his mind of, I'm just going to do well and people should be nice to me. But then what happens when they aren't? Well, you get resentful. And when you get resentful, you start acting in ways that you probably wouldn't act without that resentment. And, you know, this doesn't happen just in basketball, of course. This happens in every relationship. When we don't really communicate what we want, when we're uncomfortable with doing that. When we're uncomfortable, maybe it's with standing out. Maybe it's a fear of exposure, fear of success, fear of failure. It's both ultimately the fear of exposure. When we're just not comfortable asking for our needs or even comfortable with the feeling of anger that comes from having our own needs, then we don't communicate it, but in the back of our mind we go, okay, well, maybe people will just be nice to me. And then when that doesn't happen, boy, it really leads to toxic relationships and acting in ways you typically wouldn't act. So ultimately what the covert contract comes down to is, you know, a boundary issue. Your inability to communicate because of dysregulated emotion, either anxiety or anger, and because you can't do that, you know, the resentment builds. Your needs are going unmet. I just define resentment as anger that you hold on to. You don't really do anything with. The resentment builds, and so you're going to act in ways to sabotage the relationship. But, you know, this is, of course, in any romantic boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife situation, when you're not getting what you want and you think the other person should be doing something, you start acting passive-aggressive. You start making comments that you typically wouldn't say. Is that really you saying it? Are you a bad person for saying those things? Or do you just have a difficult time managing emotions and developing strong boundaries? Or psychologically, I would say, you know, what's really the difference? And it gets really tricky because you can look at Scottie Pippen's situation in the Bulls in the 90s and thought, yeah, they should have just paid him more money. So in a sense, Scottie's resentment was correct. What he was resentful about was correct. And I was talking about this last week. We can be correct about a resentment, yet the resentment is still incorrect because it comes from us and our own inability to communicate. I mean, this is easier to see with Pippen's issue because it was, I mean, his covert contract was literally about a contract, right? But it's more difficult, especially if like somebody has really hurt you in your past or you've been abused and you're resentful about it. You know, it's just like the bare facts of it. They can't really do anything to help you with that resentment. And all the resentment that you have at that point, is, I would challenge you, is it really about that person? They may have caused it, but ultimately now it's about you. your inability to communicate, your inability to get your own needs met. And look, I don't want to come off like I'm condemning Scottie Pippen. I mean, I must have had 3 shirts when I was a kid that had Scottie Pippen on them. No, I still love Scottie Pippen, but this is just about understanding psychology and understand why people do make decisions that make them look like, in this situation, a bad teammate. Getting your psychology together is about putting yourself in the best situation possible, from which you're much more likely to make a healthy decision. And if you don't put yourself in that situation where you're more likely to, that psychological headspace from which you're more likely to make a healthy decision, then, I don't care what your morals are. I don't care what your ethics are. You're not going to make a decision that you really need to make. I mean, and Pippen had this quote in episode 7, reflecting back on that decision not to go into that final play of game 3, is he said, "I probably wouldn't change it," direct quotation. And I don't know exactly what Pippen means by this, but psychologically I think it's accurate. Given the psychological state Scottie Pippen was in, there isn't anything he could do to change it. But what you can do is understand how your psychology works and how to put yourself in a correct psychological state so you can go on to, not be resentful, to have discipline, to not procrastinate. It doesn't come from these decisions necessarily to not procrastinate or have discipline or not be resentful, but from a bunch of smaller decisions that lead up to that. And that's what we do here at Animus. I mean, we just break down your emotions. So when you are resentful, when you are making covert contracts, we know exactly why. And we don't just say, "Oh, well, stop making covert contracts." No, we have to look at your patterns of behavior. We have to look at the emotional life that you've been having, the emotional patterns you've been going through up until that point, and look at the key points in it and change those key points so when you're in a situation where you need to communicate, you're much more likely to do that. We do free consultations, animusempire.com/schedule free. Yeah, 30-minute consultations. Just sign up and let me know what's going on with you. And if I can help, I'll be happy to do that. And if not, I'm happy to point you in the right direction. All right, guys, I'll leave it there. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. Tell a friend. And always remember that life is a lot more fun when you ask for what you want.